If you guys have heard somebody say that Autopilot does all the work in the airplane, send them this video because I'm about to break down why Autopilot doesn't do everything. It's the biggest myth in aviation that Autopilot is basically the replacement for pilots, but that's not what it does. Long story short, the Autopilot is a way for pilots to control the airplane. There's the short answer right there. But if you guys want the long answer, stick around because we're gonna explain why your workload as a pilot doesn't magically disappear once you hit the autopilot button. So let's define the autopilot. There's three different types. We're gonna go over primarily the 2-axis and the 3-axis autopilot. So it's not magic. The autopilot is a flight control system that manages specific tasks when you tell it to. Here's what it can do. You have the hold mode, so it'll hold your roll and pitch. You also have heading or navigation tracking, so the magenta line. Altitude hold, vertical speed, flight level change, and VNAV as well. I have seen VNAV in a G1000. Those would be for your altitude. You also have LNAV and VNAV, which is more of your jet level type of thing, but you still kind of have it in the GPS because it's still technically lateral and vertical navigation. And then you also have your approach modes as well. Also, quick little tip, well, not really a tip, but little fun fact. Did you guys know that in between flight level 290 and flight level 410, you are legally required to have an autopilot that has altitude hold? The reason why that the FAA requires this is because in between flight level 290 and flight level 410, you have something called RVSM, reduced vertical separation minima. So autopilot kind of becomes mandatory gear. It's not optional. And if it fails, you have to leave RVSM. Cool? Yes? No? Yes? Let's talk about what it doesn't do. Autopilot doesn't make any decisions. This is not like the autopilot that's in a Tesla. The pilot has to control it. So, here's what the autopilot cannot do. The autopilot cannot avoid traffic or terrain. I have seen this firsthand before on a flight simulator live stream of somebody sending a 737 right through a mountain because they did not disconnect the autopilot. That's also another thing. If you guys are in a dangerous situation and you guys have the autopilot on, turn it off because the best pilot is you. And there's your little ego boost for the day as well. But it also cannot navigate around weather, it cannot talk to ATC or acknowledge clearances, and it can't monitor fuel systems or engine health. So if you lose an engine, the autopilot's not automatically going to divert. You're going to have to disconnect the autopilot or keep it on because you're probably going to be in a hold, and then figure it out from there. Autopilot doesn't do all the work. It also cannot create descent. Well, okay. Before I should say it cannot create descent plans, I'm going to get into it a little bit. There's two different types of ways that us pilots descend. We can descend via an arrival, or ATC will tell us when to descend, or, well, technically there's three. If we're VFR, we have to figure it out by ourselves. The autopilot definitely cannot do reroutes, but it can kind of make descent plans. Let me talk about it a little. So we have something in aviation called STAR, Standard Terminal Arrival Routes. Standard terminal arrival route. That is what a STAR is going to be. So what we can do with a STAR is ATC can tell us to descend via the STAR. Now how that would work is let's use one of my flight simulator examples. So we're flying into Atlanta on either the Gandalf or the Hobbit 2, and I might need to pull up the plate. I forgot the fix name, but there's this one fix that we need to cross, and what we'll do is better put a little snippet up of what I actually do. What we have to do is we have to put the altitude restriction inside of the FMS, or it could also be the GPS, whichever one you're using. And what it'll do is it'll automatically create a descent plan that's optimal for the aircraft. So that's really the main thing that the autopilot can do with creating descent plans, but it can't do reroutes. And I kind of just rambled about that for like 2 minutes. Autopilot also cannot handle failures or emergencies. If you guys lose an engine, the autopilot's not going to be doing all the work. If you guys have to divert, the autopilot's also not going to be doing all the work. The autopilot is only as good as the pilot's management as well. You got to know what it does, how to do it, and when to make it stop. So there's things to watch out for. Mode confusion. This has gotten some people a few times. It's actually got me when I tried learning the 737. Kind of, not really. You gotta know what each mode does. Altitude hold, vertical speed, flight level change. Flight level change and vertical speed might seem very similar, very different concepts. And then you also have vertical navigation as well. Usually you're just gonna do flight level change because you're just gonna climb at a specific airspeed up to a certain altitude. Unexpected disengagements, because this can also be a big thing. I have not had an autopilot disengage on me IRL in flight, but I have on the simulator quite a few times actually too. And if you're not paying attention, let's say you're an IMC and the autopilot automatically disconnects on you, easy spatial disorientation. And also make sure you're monitoring the autopilot. You don't want to assume it's doing the right thing when it's really not. So you kind of got to keep monitoring it. And always verify what you asked it to do and what it's actually doing. With autopilot on, your role shifts from a pilot to a systems manager, but that still takes some skill because you still need to monitor flight instruments and navigation accuracy. You still need to stay ahead on top of mental modeling, so situational awareness. Communication with ATC, autopilot can't do that. They just can't. Be ready to take over instantly. This is a big thing. I kind of talked about in the last part, but you still need to take over just in case if the autopilot does something that you don't want it to do. You know, an engine can fail, but an autopilot can also fail too. And you also still have to keep weather, fuel, and alternates in mind. So it's great when pilots know when to use it and when to turn it off as well. In our private pilot training, which every pilot has to go through, we are trained to fly without the autopilot. Autopilots can't do landings for us, except major big jet airliners when they're in like total IMC. All right, autopilot fails. There's times that us pilots are not allowed to fly with the autopilot. I should really put up a counter with how many times I say pilot, because there's pilot, autopilot, whatever. So the autopilot is not invincible. Let's look at some things where things can go sideways. Icing. Icing is a big thing with autopilots. Autopilots and icing do not mix well together. We learned this in our instrument training as well. If we have an incipient if we have a tailplane stall, which is basically when the elevator gets iced over too much, has a negative angle of attack, then basically what will happen is the wings will still be flying, they'll still be flapping, it's just the elevator is stalled. That can happen with tailplane icing. That's when it'd be important to turn off the autopilot, because autopilots are not trained to basically work in that. I think I was wrong about the negative vertical angle of attack, so if I am, leave a comment down below, because I'm still learning instrument. But we still can get tailplane stalls in icing conditions. You also get severe turbulence that just disconnects the autopilot, which is what happens on the simulator a lot. I'll just hit like this bumpy rough patch of air and then boom, autopilot comes off. You can also select the wrong mode on arrival, which is, ooh, that can be a disaster. Or you can have a visual approach without navigational guidance. Primarily don't want to use an autopilot for a visual approach because you're going to be flying the plane visually, not by reference to an ILS, an RNAV approach, or VOR approach. The plane may be stable, but you are still responsible for the airplane, even when it's an autopilot. So the next time that somebody says that autopilot flies the whole airplane, send this video to them. It's a tool, not a pilot replacement. If this video helped you rethink what autopilots is really doing, hit that like button down below, and also drop a comment with your own story if you have some weird story about an autopilot failure. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 2,000, so well, let's try to hit it.